Hi all. If all's going well, then hopefully we're now live. There's no kind of PowerPoint or slides or anything behind me, partially because this is all going to be about Oracy, and what better way to discuss a topic like Oracy than sticking to just the spoken word. Start off just introducing myself and this session this evening. So my name is Lee Peckover. I am a PhD researcher at the University of York. I specifically and mostly look at well-being and mental health for children. That's kind of my main PhD focus. It's a little bit more niche than that, but that's the overarching aim of it. Alongside that, I am a former primary school teacher. I also work at Classroom Secrets, hence why I'm here this evening as their head of research. And alongside this as well, partially where my kind of interest in Oracy comes from, as well as the mental health and wellbeing benefits that we'll touch on later on in this. Part of why I'm interested in this is that I also do still have active roles, more children facing in education and adult learner facing as well. So I teach at the University of York. I teach undergraduates and some postgraduates. I also am a governor at a special school here in York, and I have a 3-year-old son as well. So my kind of interest in Oracy and development of children stems from all of my background, my research, but also my obvious desire for my little son to do well. And I believe one of the ways in which he will is through schools and his school in the future being able to properly implement and embed Oracy throughout their curriculum. So a question just to start us off. I just want everyone to have a little think about this as something as a jumping off point, and that is just, when was the last time that you heard a child really express themselves, be that in class, be that to you one-to-one in small groups or something, just really express themselves, being able to share an idea or ask a great question, or being able to sort of think aloud in a way that made you stop and say wow. Something that showed how they were capable of really fitting a lot of things. So as we move on to Oracy then, in terms of just what it is, it's essentially the ability to articulate thoughts and ideas effectively through speaking and listening. And I'm already very aware that I'm doing a lot of saying I'm moving my hands a lot, I am pausing, maybe even stumbling over odd words, I'm being thrown off by answering questions rather than being clear. These are all things that, had I had a fantastic embedding of Oracy in my own primary school, I'd probably be much better at now. And this is something that you can help your children in your class or your children at home actually be better at, so they don't have to keep saying as they speak as I do, because I'm aware that it's firstly quite annoying, and secondly it doesn't make me an effective communicator. So it is that ability to articulate thoughts and ideas effectively. There's Voice 21, and there's also previously an all-party parliamentary group for Oracy, and they define it as being the ability to speak eloquently, to articulate ideas and thoughts, and to influence through talking. So that's it's to collaborate with peers and to express views confidently and appropriately. So that's kind of just a generic kind of overview of what Oracy kind of is. But more importantly for us as teachers and anyone working in education, what Oracy is now, for us right now, is a really hot topic. It's something that is very timely if you're watching this right now, as of sort of December 2024, and it will be over the next few years as well. And that's partially because not so long ago, obviously we had a change in government, and Labour have a massive focus on Oracy as part of their curriculum views. So Labour have just completed a curriculum and assessment review, the evidence stage that is, where they have gone and spoken to teachers, head teachers, parents, people in research spheres such as myself, people in academia, which is where kind of I would lie in terms of giving evidence, as well as governors, different bodies for different subjects, and they've started the process of gathering all of that information. But we already know that they are pushing very strongly towards Oracy, and we know that because they were speaking about it even before the assessment review. But I personally know that because I've also been in some of the discussions where they've talked about Oracy in their actual assessment and curriculum review, and Oracy has been a massive focus, as has actually wellbeing and metacognition, which both benefit from Oracy. So you have kind of Labour already pushing very much in that direction. You have Keir Starmer talking about Oracy before even coming into power, and it's obvious how large the focus will be, because he was already talking about and focused on Oracy long before he came into power, but also because Labour really didn't talk that much about education in the run-up. if anyone is switched on to the world of politics, you may feel as an educator that, they spoke about it to some extent because maybe we focused on it, but really a lot of what their interest was in growth and in economic things, as well as just being a change. Obviously, we heard that word a lot, but what wasn't focused on much was education. It wasn't a harping back to Tony Blair's education. It was very minor focus. So the fact that Oracy was spoken about to a very large degree shows the level of importance that's being placed upon it. The things that they really spoke about were early years with the new nurseries, Oracy, and breakfast clubs. So it's one of the kind of top 3 things that they're looking at changing. So if you're not, as a teacher or as a school, looking at this now, you may wish to do so very, very soon. And part of that was being discussed at the time and that is still being discussed now is the idea and concept of Oracy as a kind of 4th R. So obviously we all know the importance of reading, writing, arithmetic. But what's being spoken about now is much like how reading is required for a lot of other learning and much how writing is in terms of getting your ideas across. Oracy is going to get a bigger focus in terms of it, because speaking and listening really underpin everything else. It's the building blocks from which we're capable of learning. And there's a lot of evidence that surrounds this. So the EEF show that oral language interventions can actually lead to 6 months of additional progress for children. But even more importantly than this, that's especially the case in early years and primary education, where this greatest impact is seen. So we know from this kind of evidence that it can have these massive advantages. And it's not just in speaking and listening that the advantages of Oracy shine through. So we also see that there's further academic benefits. So there's research that shows that group discussion, for example, in mathematics, improves problem solving. So it actually furthers their ability to do reasoning and problem solving. So you get this right, you're going to see reasoning and problem solving in maths improve as well as their ability in speaking and listening. It also improves things like understanding in history, where debates in history further something else as well. So you can implement a debate in a history lesson, and what you're going to see is that it doesn't just improve their knowledge of history, that kind of substantive knowledge, it actually improves their critical thinking as well. So it's kind of one of those crucial building blocks of education where it's going to, if you get it right, improve reasoning and problem solving in maths. It's going to improve critical thinking in history. It's going to improve across the broader spectrum of curricula. And one of the other areas that we really see massive improvements in is social and emotional learning or ability, or it just has such a huge impact on social and emotional levels for children. And this is obviously an area I feel passionately about. If anyone was here at the start of this, you will be aware that I'm currently doing my PhD that's looking at well-being and mental health in children in particular, as well as a whole lot of broader other areas. But something about Oracy that really helps children in this area. So Voice 21 talk about how it enhances confidence in classroom engagement. So you've got the confidence element of this. But what's sometimes not sort of spoken about enough to my mind is how it also improves social skills, it improves critical thinking, and it gives children the ability, crucially, to articulate their thoughts. So what you kind of see with this is, and something that, I mean, it's kind of obvious when you really actually reflect and think on it, but for children, it gives them an ability to actually express themselves and to talk about their own emotions and to understand their own feelings. And this is something that, as they go through, EYFS has a good focus on mental health and well-being, and has a good focus on and that comes across in terms of their self-regulation and their ability to actually communicate those feelings. And then it kind of a little bit in the curriculum fades away, but actually we know that children really need this focus. The average age onset for any sort of mental health condition is around about 8 years old is where it starts out. So once you hit 8, you're already seeing children have those kinds of issues. And why is it often not diagnosed until 14? The reason is that children don't know how to articulate those feelings that they're experiencing. They don't know how to tell people and to tell varying different audiences that they're actually going through something. So often we'll see things like a child who is quiet a lot or seems like they're probably okay because they're not speaking up and not saying things. Something like a good focus embedded through the curriculum on Oracy can really help children gain that ability to not be the silent child when they're struggling, to actually be someone who can go forward. And yes, there's emotional elements to it where maybe that's not going to always work and not be appropriate, but it's going to potentially give children that ability to come to you as an adult, or to even speak to some of their class peers and be able to say, I'm having difficulties, I'm having issues, and understanding what those feelings are, understanding not just that they are going through some difficult emotional things, but why they are, why that's normal, being able to then verbalize it and give voice to some of the thoughts and feelings that they've got going on, and ask for help when they need it. So you have that academic, but you also have that social and emotional element. And if you want to sort of look a little bit more into the academic, then there's people like Professor Neil Mercer, who's at Cambridge. Has been, this is a thing where Oracy is not that new. He's been writing on Oracy since the sort of early to mid 2000s. And he actually has written different. I'm going to try and put some links in this afterwards, by the way, if anyone wants to read any further research or wants to look at any of the toolkits or resources that I'm going to talk about here. But yeah, Professor Mercer's sort of done focuses on Oracy and particularly wrote massive pieces on this in sort of 2013. So this isn't something that's new. It's in the public eye somewhat now because, one, we're having a massive sort of mental health crisis through children, through young people and adolescents, and Oracy could be a solution to that. Two, we've got a lot of evidence now that shows the academic outcomes that it can have. And three, because it's such a big focus for Labour. So if you do choose to dig into some of what Professor Mercer sort of said about this, it's the idea of sort of exploratory talk links and collaborative dialogue, allowing for better reasoning and problem solving skills. And then EAF in terms of this as well talk about how reading aloud and structured questioning improve comprehension and critical reasoning. So you'll get children who are better readers, maybe not purely in terms of fluency of reading, but in terms of them being able to better dig into things and understand character motives and actually discuss and understand more of what they're reading, as well as then that social emotional thing. And another area that Oracy helps, I am very aware that I'm just talking up a lot of benefits here, but this is just how sort of strongly I do feel that this is an important area. I will get onto some practical ideas for people to implement it, as well as some ways in which we can help you later on. But I do want to just sort of drill down a little bit more into just how helpful it can be and just why it's so worthwhile for you to cover more about this topic now. And one of the things that's great with Oracy is that it can really create equity. And equity is something where you're looking for equality of outcome from different starting points. And an example of this that's sometimes used is you may have sort of two people trying to see something over a fence, and one person's particularly tall, they can see everything that they're looking over at. Maybe it's a sporting event that they're looking at over a fence. The person who's tall can already see it. Someone who's short alongside them may not be able to see anything at all. And equality would be to give them nothing, because they're both on the same level floor, the fence is the same height. This is equality. Equity, where we create a version of equality through outcome, is where we give the person who needs it the boost. So we give them like a step stool so they can see over that fence and get actually access to something that they wouldn't have had before. That gives both people a level vision. One person's getting something the other isn't. So in a sense, we're giving something extra to someone. But in a more important sense, the outcome is the same for them both. They're both getting that equality of outcome, which is what equity is about. And Oracy is something that can be fantastic for that. It levels a playing field because children have, for differing reasons, but one of them is socioeconomic status of children. Children have this gap. We know about the academic gap between socioeconomic statuses. We know that there's a language and vocabulary gap between language-rich and language-poor children. And often that can come down to the socioeconomic status of their household and their background. And Oracy can be something where, if used correctly, not only can it be used as an intervention to help those children who have a more language-poor background, it can also be used across the class to ensure that everyone has access. And there's differing ways you can do that. There's something by Alex Quigley called Closing the Vocabulary Book, if anyone wants to have a read. Closing the Vocabulary Gap. It's a book by him, that looks at this in more depth and the ability to speak out and actually close that language gap. And Oracy can really do that for you. So again, the Early Education Endowment Foundation, EEF, they write that oral language skills can help disadvantaged pupils catch up. They can reduce those gaps in vocabulary and improve comprehension. I'm aware as well that I need to slow down a little bit. I am someone who's from a very sort of lower socioeconomic status and also didn't have good Oracy in my school, so I can comfortably say now that if you see me stumbling over things, speaking too quickly, anything becomes hard to follow, hey, Oracy would have helped me, and that's another reason I'm so passionate about it, is that it would help children who've gone through a similar background to myself to sort of achieve more and be able to do things like this more comfortably and easily. So that kind of early intervention does create equity though. So it helps level up the children who need it without hindering the children who perhaps don't need it as much. they can still benefit from it, but it's a leveling of that playing field that doesn't hinder anyone, much like the example of two different heights of children trying to see the same thing. The taller child isn't hindered by the shorter child getting that view. The outcome is that they both just have the same view and equity is created. So it builds those essential communication skills for all children, regardless of their background. There are versions of Oracy that look more at accessibility. This is important for me as a governor at a special school. Not all of it is about speaking and listening. There are other versions of it. You can create better dialogue through sign language, and there's other workarounds for this that you can look into. I'll try and put more links again in this afterwards. If I was capable of doing it a while ago, I'd be doing it now, so just check at the end of this, please. So yeah, in terms of that social mobility, this is where it really comes in, and this is something that's about the equity to do, like in relation to equity, where Oracy kind of empowers children and gives them tools for life. This isn't just about, as much as it does give you the academic benefits, Oracy isn't just about saying it's going to improve history, it's going to improve science, it's going to improve their reading, or it's going to improve their writing, or anything like that. It's also going to give them advantages and benefits for the rest of their lives. And just sort of think about some of the areas in life where Oracy would be important for you, that ability to vocalize and speak coherently to different audiences in particular. It's something that will help children with future interviews. It will help with teamwork in team meetings, being able to actually voice things and contribute and take part and ask questions. It could help them move down a leadership route in later life, where perhaps there'd be disadvantages if they haven't had it. This is particularly shown when we look at outcomes for children in private schools versus comprehensive schools. And this is not at all a dig at private schools. This is in fact highlighting something that they generally get right, that is done more specifically in their schools, and it's done because they've historically seen the importance of this. And this was highlighted by the head of Eton, who specifically spoke about the fact that actually children from the sort of school he looks after go on to, and obviously there's a lot of other reasons for this as well, but those children go on to have leadership roles, and they're going to be more comfortable in those roles because they've gotten this kind of experience at their school. They've done public speaking. It's the reason that private schools sometimes have things like debate societies that are not as common across comprehensive schools, because they see the importance of the ability to debate, the ability to express your ideas, to back up what you're saying, to be clear and to be able to articulate your ideas and thoughts properly so that you can contribute to discussions, or so that you can give a speech, or so that you can, interview well. All of these things are going to help children to rise through the rest of their lives. But there's a lot of evidence that it's going to help them right now as well. So Voice 21 is a brilliant organisation for this if you want to have a look at them. But they report that like 77% of teachers who work through with them improve student attainment, and that 90% of them improve their actual speaking skills, even over short interventions. And then again, back to the Education Endowment Foundation, who show that the 6-month progress. So you've got all of this evidence. It's at a point now where it's, why would you not do this? Why would you not want to look into this? Why would you not want to further your teaching in this area? When it can, improve vocab development, when it can improve reading comprehension, writing skills, it can also give children greater resilience, which links back to the mental health and well-being. But yes, so there's, as well as Professor Mercer, who I referenced earlier, which I'll put a link into, there's also, I think it's Cambridge again, actually, Professor Alexander's at, who looked more heavily into dialogic teaching, which also shows the kind of benefits of purposeful talk, but also that ability to speak, have those conversations and speech between teacher and learner. So really working on Oracy skills can kind of develop not just the children's relationships with one another and their discussions within class and their speaking and listening skills, but also your own, where you get a better understanding of how children hear you and how children actually listen to things that you're communicating through. So a little bit, just on the pertinence of this now, which was the Oracy and policy stuff. I mentioned it earlier on, but just to further reiterate before we get onto the practical ideas, which is next, just to say that obviously Keir Starmer's got this massive focus on embedding Oracy through the curriculum. You have the Oracy Commission's work, who, with Voice 21, looked at ensuring that all children receive high quality Oracy education. And then, as well as this, alongside this again isn't all that new. Prior to this, there was also an all-party parliamentary group. Sorry, I'm talking a little bit too much on politics and policy. That's when kind of all of the different parties have a small collective who work almost informally, having specific meetings to further a certain aim. So there's one for education, there's one for ed tech, and previously there was one just purely for Oracy, and again it sort of reinforces just how important and massive this is going to be. It's not being reintroduced just yet, but that's because there's currently the curriculum and assessment review going on, the outcomes of which we'll get early on in spring. The initial report will come out, and then the final report will come out in the autumn of next year. So another reason to have this as a timely thing now is that often as teachers, what we find is that we have something dropped on us, and often it can feel like it's last minute and it's just suddenly you're expected to know. I remember teaching when learning without levels suddenly became a thing, and when GPS, or SPAG as some call it, suddenly came in, and we were just expected, right, you know that, so go and deliver it. This is something where we don't want it to feel like that for you. Oracy shouldn't, hopefully, feel that way, because we already know it's coming, because by springtime we're going to see the initial report and we know it's going to have Oracy in there, because by the autumn following, Labour are going to publish the full report and we know it's going to have Oracy in there, and because Labour have said, and whether you feel this is definitive or not, that they're going to try and give teachers longer to implement things, they're going to try and give a year. Whether they do or do not doesn't really matter, because this is a perfect opportunity to get a kind of running start on this, to get a jump on it, and to start now having a look at Voice 21, having a look at what Education Endowment Foundation's toolkit has in it, checking those things out, and also using some of the tools that Classroom Secrets has to offer for you, such as sentence stems, which I'll touch on in a moment, and also the discussion problems in maths, and our focus on vocab in some of the newer products that we're going to be bringing out. So science always has vocab across it, and we will have careful consideration to vocabulary that will be introduced at the start of sessions in things like history and geography as well, where we're taking that care to make sure it's there for you to get the actual sort of vocab rich stuff that's going to help close that vocab gap between different status children and different backgrounds. So to help you kind of get a jump on this, I just thought it might be worthwhile to give you a few sort of actionable things that you can go away and work on, or try and introduce more of, or implement in your own teaching. So one of them, and some of these, and I apologise, some of these are going to be really sort of obvious. They're going to feel like, well, I already know how to do this, and that's great if you do. Hopefully then this will serve as reinforcement that you're doing the right things and you're already experts at this, as a lot of teachers are. One of the things I would suggest very strongly is having sort of structured debates, using either current topics or using things that you've taught previously if you want to get some spaced learning and retrieval practice in, using something where you can have a structured debate that encompasses a wide area of things. You could give children preparation time for this and then have that debate. And often I find that speaking to teachers, and I visit a multitude of different schools as part of my role and part of my PhD research, I speak to a lot of different teachers. And we also have a panel as part of Classroom Secrets of a few hundred teachers who've worked with us to help shape some of our resources. So I speak to and hear from a lot of different educators in my role. And I often hear talk of sort of debates that they do when I mention Oracy. They'll talk about them in history lessons a lot, sometimes in English lessons or in drama if they specifically have standalone drama. But really, debates can come in any area. And one of the things that I would like to get across this evening is that there's so often a load of extra stuff given to you in education. And Oracy doesn't necessarily have to feel like it's, oh, and another thing. It's finding the opportunities that are already there across the day to get this in there. So an example might be breakfast clubs is a big focus at the moment. It's slowly, incrementally increasing, and there's going to be hopefully more funding along the way for these. There's no reason we can't have children at breakfast learning a lot about nutrition and healthy eating, and then debating around that, having that debate and discussion, which breakfast choice is actually the best. Is it all about just which is the healthiest? How much and to what extent do you have to factor in which actually is the most enjoyable, what their actual personal preferences are, why they prefer one thing over another, why actually something might be a preference to them and not a preference for someone else? Is there a reason you would favour something over another? All of these things are stuff that you could just have in there, and as long as you're checking in on it and guiding and helping sort of shape some of the discussions around that, you've almost won that time. You've found a way to work something in a section of time where they were already doing something anyway. You can add it to math lessons. There's nothing stopping children from having a lively debate, especially if you get something into class that's, for example, I mentioned sort of spaced learning earlier, where you have retrieval and things are revisited. It could be something where you've done place value, the children are very sound in that, you're moving on to another topic, but you want to just revisit a little bit of place value as like a starter or something. You could give them something like an erroneous example where there's a worked example up on the board. Someone has gotten a question wrong. There's a worked example that shows the wrong answer, and giving children an opportunity to discuss and debate why is this the wrong answer, and then also digging that little bit further, bringing a bit more reasoning into their discussions. It's fine to just say why it's wrong. Why do they think the person who wrote the example might have gotten it wrong? Why do they think that could have happened? What may have gone wrong that day? And you can kind of build on children's understanding, and you build on their metacognition, which is the ability to think about one's own learning and one's own thought processes. You can have children build on that by having them kind of hone in on not just, oh, this is the wrong answer and here's why this is the right answer, digging that bit further. Why would someone get this wrong? Is it just because they don't understand the concept? Is it because actually they've not revisited it recently enough and they've forgotten how to work this version? Is it because they didn't have that healthy breakfast that we spoke about previously and therefore they weren't set up to learn properly that day and so they got something wrong? Is it that they were tired, and we know that tiredness makes it a lot harder to work through your actual work that you're doing that day? That ability for children to discuss different possibilities and different options, as well as thinking about their own learning and actually what makes them a good learner. Would they always get that example right, or could it be that they might make a mistake if they're rushing, if they're too tired, if they haven't eaten right that morning, if someone's talking to them and distracting them? You can have all of this as part of a debate in a maths lesson, which is potentially an unfamiliar territory for children to bring this into, and for teachers as well. You may not think of it as a thing that you would do in there. Similarly, you could do it in PE. You could have a very similar discussion about what the best exercise is, what the best thing to do. You're in the middle of a football match, stop play. What's the best thing this player here could do? They're on the ball, they're looking around. Is there a particular pass they could pick out? Should they be going for goal? Why could they be doing those things? These are all opportunities for Oracy to really generate discussion without adding a ton of extra stuff to your workload. And then there's little things that can help you along the way with this. And some of the things that Classroom Secrets have to offer at the moment, and again, if I was quicker and better at this, I would drop this link in the chat now. I'm not, so I'll put it in afterwards for people to have a look at. We've got things like sentence stems that'll help children kind of have a jumping off point. And again, it's something that you can kind of scaffold in terms of learning. So you can start children off with, here's all of the things that you could discuss. For example, we're going to discuss why this erroneous example of a maths problem is wrong. And I'm going to give you the jumping off point of discussing that potentially this person might have skipped breakfast. They might have not revised this topic. They may not have revisited it in far too long. And then maybe next time you come to a discussion like this, you only give them the stem of that. You give them the starting point of it. And in science, you could similarly do this, where you give them something where they have to create a hypothesis about something, and you give them the half sentence that kicks them off, and gradually you can remove it. And that's how we kind of scaffold this to make sure it's there. And another way is to make sure that you've got a lot of the vocabulary there for them, that again, you can gradually remove once they have it embedded, and once you have crossed that vocabulary gap, they then can just act on this. So running structured debates is one great option, and supporting children through things like the sentence stems that we have on offer. You could have, as a starting point for a structured debate, you could use our new mistake investigators resources, or you could use our discussion problems. Again, I'll put links in afterwards. But these would be potential things that you could use where, rather than however you may visit these normally, if you do, you could decide, okay, today I'm going to expand on it a little bit further and have them discuss not just, is this wrong? Why is it wrong? But also, why might someone make that mistake, and see if we can generate a discussion around that. Other things that you could implement and introduce is having more sort of exploratory talk. So having, if you were doing a maths problem, or if you were doing something that's a historical inquiry that you're working on, encouraging small groups to obviously collaborate on problem solving here. So not doing so much. And I know everyone kind of, and most teachers are very good at this anyway, it's that kind of talk to your partner. But often I think something that happens, and something that I see in schools, is that gets rushed. It becomes, we're doing such and such problem, talk to your partner. And there's a kind of worry that children, yes, they're talking about it at first, but now the discussion's going off in different areas, and they're not really talking about the problem that we've set up for them. And maybe they're talking about what happened at playtime, or what's going to be for lunch, or whatever else it may be. And it's easy to get stuck in that thing of, okay, I better quickly move on and just ask for an answer, and then we roll on. Well, it's something that you can slow down a little bit. If you are having that exploratory talk and you are getting them to work in either pairs or in small groups, it's something that's a great jumping off point where you can then either stop discussion when you think it is getting out of hand, and then introduce something new to the discussion point. So they're discussing a problem. Okay, we're going to pause, but I'm not going to move on from discussion. I'm going to allow discussion to continue to happen. What I'm going to do is introduce something new to this. I'm going to take a couple of points and then ask people to revisit their discussion and talk about it a little bit further, or add something that they may not have considered. Or I'm going to try and pluck out a few bits of vocabulary that I'm hearing and thread it across the rest of the class. Kind of pop it all over where you sort of look at, okay, I've heard someone here in history say talking about primary sources. I'm going to ask everyone else if they've considered whether this is a primary source that we're discussing or whether it's secondary, and what kind of evidence level we have to support it. I'm going to kind of thread that through and allow children to discuss it. And then you can work in metacognition in this as well, where you can kind of have children think about, say you give them a primary source in history. Do they trust it? Why do they trust it? But then what would make them trust it more? And then have that discussion. And it could be that, they need more evidence to see from it. It could be that the source of that information is very reliable, and so they have a little bit more trust in it. It could be that, on the flip side of that, they've seen things like this before that they then discovered were in fact not trustworthy sources. And, having more of that discussion about what makes them, what they're bringing to this discussion themselves from their previous experience, really expands on that discussion for them. And then also just a little bit about like that, those kind of interactive activities. There's a lot of drama techniques that are great for this. Things like hot seating, things like conscience alley, things like just having regular talk partners who children can work with, or even mixing up who those talk partners are to ensure that there's a wider range of people to speak with, and including yourself in discussions with groups, because it's one thing for children to be capable of speaking to their peers. It's another to be able to speak to adults in the room as well. And it's interesting always to see how capable they are of switching their discussion, because now they're speaking to an adult, they're speaking to someone who potentially is coming from a place of having a wider knowledge than them. Do they know to then potentially switch to asking you more? Do they know to question more of their own work that they're discussing? Like, you may see them in peer groups saying, oh, I trust this because it's primary source and stuff. When you bring yourself into the discussion, do they start saying, I think this because of this background, but is it true about this, and asking you more of the questions, because that'd be a useful switch if they are capable of changing how they speak in terms of who their actual audience is. Just a couple of examples from my own teaching, things that have worked particularly well for me are, and one of them I've seen done by a lot of teachers, is getting something like an artifact in history. There's things you can borrow from local libraries, for example, or even just using images of artifacts can work for this. And having children discuss what they think it is, having children discuss what they think it could be used for. If they've got a good sort of knowledge of the rough historical time period, maybe they're going to be really good at this. If they haven't, maybe they're going to find this particularly challenging, or they're going to have wild sort of outlandish guesses. And one of the things that can be really interesting in this is starting them off with no knowledge of what this could possibly be, gradually introducing certain extra clues. One thing I've seen that that I've magpied myself and taken into my own teaching is having sort of 4 different stations. You have an artifact on each one. You have a group of children at each one. They discuss and they write down all their own ideas for what that object could be and why they think it as well. So what they're bringing to this that's given them that belief. So it could be that if it's something from the Tudor era, they think it because they know something about royal families at that time, or they've learned something about the time period prior to it that gives them that indication. I'm glad that I've just seen someone on behalf of Classroom Secrets dropping sentence stems into the chat. That's handy. So yeah, and then having the groups rotate so that they then have to build on what's already written. So they can't just rely on, oh, I'll bring in the first thing that comes to mind. So they have to actually read each other's work and then discuss, okay, I thought I was going to say this. It's already down. I've been told I need to bring something new to this. And then at the end, you can reflect on all of what they've had brought to it, all of their sort of guesses of what each artifact could be, before then sort of teaching and inputting a little bit more about what it actually is, or what the needs were at the time and what could it have addressed. Equally, you could do this at the end of a topic and kind of have a look at how much children have worked out and how much context they have around it. They may still not recognise the object, but they may know more about the lives of people at that time. They may know more about what their needs were and why they might use something that's shown in front of them. So that's a really good one for history. And then also for any topic, this one works. If anyone's familiar with a very long-running radio show called Just a Minute, this is an activity that I've done with my class, and particularly year 5 and 6 seem to really enjoy this one. They need to already have the knowledge of an area before you give them this. We'll not be cruel with this one. But what you effectively do is just challenge children. You can do it in groups, you can do it as a whole class thing. You have children take it in turns to try and speak for 1 minute on a specific subject or topic. It is literally the same as how the radio show works, if you're familiar with it. So you'll have one children who's kind of in the hot seat, who has to talk about that topic. So it may be, okay, we've learned a lot about Henry VIII. You're going to sit and talk about Henry VIII for 1 minute. You can do it in a small group if that's how they're confident. If they are confident enough, and my class used to do this, they'll speak to the whole class from the front, effectively presenting, where they'll go, and you might have different teams. There's loads of ways you can do it. But how we did it was they would speak, and the goal is to speak for 1 minute on that topic with no repetition and no pauses, and also avoidance of anything that I do frequently. So I was not good at this game. Anytime when you go anything like that, anyone who calls it out takes over from the person speaking. So effectively, you start off, there's 60 seconds on the clock. They have to speak about Henry VIII for the whole 60 seconds with no repetition and none of that, and no pauses. If they get called out, the next person comes up and they've only got to do the rest of the time. So you may have a child who does 40 seconds straight. The next person only has to fill that last 20, but it's harder because they can't repeat what the first child said either. And then once you hit that 1 minute, set off a buzzer, the person who's in the hot seat wins that round. So it's quite a good one to do in sort of two teams, where children tend to get quite a lot of laughs out of calling each other out of spotting and noticing that they say and you've got to kind of foster a really trusting environment, because no one wants to be called out on it if you don't have that trust in the class. But my certainly one of my year 5 classes just loved doing this, and it really developed their ability to speak publicly and to speak to the whole class. It was just something that came along massively the minute we started doing it. We also used to do we used to call it stand up for the week, end of every Friday. You literally stand up at the front, you try and make the class laugh. The only rule is it's not physical comedy, and it has to be spoken. And at first they didn't really totally grasp this, and then gradually one or two of them would get that they could come in and just tell a joke that they'd rehearsed in advance and deliver it well. And then you'd have children who eventually started working in quite elaborate long stories in the build up to a joke. And it was something that over time I really saw them move on, and it felt like just a silly little fun activity. Kind of little do they know that they're learning a crucial life skill while they're all just having fun. So these are just a couple of things that you can kind of implement and use, as well as obviously using some of the resources that are in the chat. Hopefully we'll be able to develop some more stuff that's useful for you as Oracy grows and develops as a sort of topic throughout schools. So I'm going to kind of try and wrap up a little bit here, because I've rambled on for a really long time. I would encourage people to share anything either in the comments here or once this is on YouTube, or if you watch this at a later date. Don't know who's going to watch this for 40 minutes, but there'll be shorter clips of this hopefully made where people might be able to take in just short clips of this rather than having to listen to me for 40 straight minutes. I would encourage people to share ideas that they've got separately, anything that's really worked to improve or enhance Oracy in your classroom or your school, any examples of just sort of fun activities and games that you've done. So yeah, share experiences, because we're all educators, and I think it's really important that we all help each other out. If you've got something that works, share it, because we're all here to help children, and we're all here to try and get children to develop and grow and become the best versions of themselves. And while Oracy is great for that, so is sharing best practice. Beyond that, if anyone wants to read further, there's Voice 21 reports and frameworks. There's EEF's toolkit for oral language intervention. And just to kind of reinforce, if you prioritise Oracy, you're not just helping children succeed academically, you're preparing them for life. And I think that's why it's so crucial, whether there's a government focus on it or not. It's something we should just all be doing, because at the end of the day, we all just want to see children succeed. So hopefully I've sort of covered how important it is for academic, social and emotional development. I've spoken a little bit too long probably on evidence and policy, and then hopefully given at least a few sort of practical examples. I'd love for people to add some more, either now or at a later time if you come back to this, or on YouTube once it's uploaded there. Thank you very much, and goodbye.